This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. Today I'm joined all the way from what has been a very turbulent city, Washington, D.C., Mr. Walker Brown of Lubanzi Wines. How are you today, Mr. Tie-Dye?
I'm doing well. It is, I have to say, I'm very much missing my second home in South Africa right now, where we have snow here in Washington D.C. And it's smack in the middle of summer and harvest in South Africa, so I'm missing it very much.
Right. So let's get to the kind of root of the whole Lubanzi project, because you have quite an interesting origin story, do you not?
Yeah. So I launched the project. Oh God, it must be 5 years ago now,
Okay.
or something around that. Essentially on the heels of years and bits and pieces living, traveling, hiking, backpacking all across South Africa. So I'm originally American. I first traveled to South Africa in 2014. I actually went as a student, so I was studying at the University of Cape Town. So I was sort of studying politics and political science, which was my sort of area of undergraduate study. So not business and not wine.
Right.
Uh, and I think basically from the very moment I stepped off the plane was completely and totally smitten with this place, with the sort of tapestry and the culture and the people. I say this all the time to folks, but I think South Africa has this way, I think, of romancing you unlike any other place in the world. And once you sort of catch that bug, you have it for life, which is exactly what happened to us.
May I ask what it was that drew you there to go to school down there?
In full admission, the thing that I was looking for was I was on the hunt for adventure.
Right.
And admittedly, I was on the hunt for a place where I could spend a lot of time outside. So I'm a huge hiker. I'm a huge backpacker. South Africa is one of the sort of capitals of the world, if that's what you're into.
Yeah.
So admittedly, that's sort of what I was after.
And how did Lubanzi come about? Because I reading the origin story, I found it quite cute actually. The story of this mysterious dog that came across you on your hike.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with any project like this, it starts as a relatively half-baked idea and grows into something a bit more.
Okay.
So I moved sort of full-time to Cape Town in 2016 with a very sort of small light bulb. And, I had been lucky enough to spend a bunch of time out, sort of while hiking and traveling out in really rural agricultural areas. And you pretty immediately get exposed to this huge community of artisans and farmers sort of producing these amazing products, these amazing wines that globally, I think don't really get the recognition that they deserve.
Right.
So it sort of started, my co-founder and I were on a very long sort of, 6-day backpacking trip along a very remote part of the South African coastline called the Wild Coast. And on the first day, we sort of got wandered up to and joined by this sort of wild, mangy, stray mutt who hiked up to us and sort of ended up sticking with us for this entire, 6-day journey.
Right.
And the locals we met along the way told us they knew this dog as Lubanzi, who I guess made a habit of following travelers back and forth along this coastline. I think probably partially because they fed him. But anyway, it sort of became this sort of beacon for us. And when we really sort of endeavored to launch the company, it sort of felt like this perfect name. It was about this sort of insatiable sort of spirit for adventure.
Does Lubanzi have a literal translation into English?
Yeah, it's a Zulu word, so the translation into English would actually be sort of like wide, expansive.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which I think is quite.
Now, what was your relationship with wine at this point?
Yeah, so I mean that's sort of where it began. Obviously, I mentioned sort of getting exposed to the really sort of massive winemaking community in South Africa. And it is, I think a lot of folks don't know, it's actually sort of oscillates somewhere between the sort of 6th and 8th largest wine producing countries in the world. So it's certainly a major international player. And I think, both my co-founder and I, being from the US, sort of had recognized there was this sort of massive gap in the market for, there was a real dichotomy between what we had felt that we discovered in South Africa and what was sort of available on the shelves of the supermarket, or in your case, the LCBO. That it wasn't sort of properly representing what South Africa sort of had to offer. And so we went on the hunt with this very small idea about building a wine company that was young and innovative and forward thinking and socially responsible, and was about like a real story and real people in a real place and real wine. And I think that's sort of where it began. And we were lucky enough to find friends and partners who sort of bought into that vision, both the vision for the wines, as well as the vision for what we wanted the company to mean and to stand for.
Now, you partnered with two winemakers down there, did you not? One of them I know reasonably well, the other less so.
Yeah. So Bruce Jack, who's a bit of a legend for South African wine around the world, and I think definitely in Canada. And a sort of younger female winemaker whose name is Trizan Bernard, who is spectacular in her own right, and certainly very well known. I guess probably a little bit less so in Canada. But yeah, we happened upon them sort of as a duo, as a pair, and I think immediately both of them really sort of, I think, felt our passion for the project, right. And as I mentioned, sort of bought into what we wanted to do. And the two of them, Trizan really is the sort of like hands-on winemaker, so the sort of like day-to-day winemaking operations in South Africa, and Bruce has sort of been an advisor on the project since we began, and I think both of them sort of have really been, I think, both obviously amazing sort of role models for us as sort of young people breaking into the industry. And I think amazing confidants and sources of inspiration.
Now, I think it's important to state here that you're not just a wine company. There's something a little bit deeper than that, something beneath the surface that is not immediately apparent unless you do a little bit more digging into your website and the info there. Yeah.
So I think it is, I think you're right. I think we try not to sort of shout about it, but the business is absolutely built as a social impact business. And I think it's really deeply intertwined with who we are. So I think if that piece of the business model didn't exist, then we wouldn't exist. Essentially, the idea was paying homage or advocating for a more sort of full, complete, equitable supply chain. I think it's important for people to realize that the products that sort of end up in their kitchen cabinets or on a wine list at their favorite restaurant, that those things take sort of human capital and human effort to bring to you. And I think wine especially, such a delicate product that takes a lot of human effort. And I think we realize that in the sort of spirit of capitalism in generally it's the people at the very beginning of the supply chain who get squeezed.
I was going to use a different word there, but yeah, squeezed,
yeah. And I think it is, or marginalized. I think what happens is, it's in wine, it's the people who are tending to the vines and picking the grapes who do end up squeezed. And I think we wanted to do our part to try to advocate for a supply chain that sort of better represented the importance and the quality of that work and that effort. So we built a partnership with our partner NGO in South Africa, who's called The Pebbles Project, that existed for I think 15 years now, essentially working to provide health, education, community development resources to the sort of in the agricultural communities in the Western Cape, just surrounding Cape Town, where our wine is grown and where the most of the wine from South Africa comes from. And so we've worked with them since we began, and have sort of tried to do our part as well to go out and get the certifications from independent auditors and bodies that could sort of back up the word. So it wasn't just all talk. So we're a certified B Corp. Everything we do is fair trade certified by Fair for Life. we're climate neutral, so we offset 100% of our carbon emissions, and that's from everything in the vineyard all the way to if I get on a plane and come visit you in Toronto, and it's sort of everything in between. And I think that stuff was really important for us to make sure that we were 100% honest and authentic with to ourselves and with our customers, that this is integral to sort of who we are as a business.
Since the project has evolved, how has it grown? What kind of production are you doing these days?
Yeah, so we'll produce about roughly between 16 and 18,000 cases this year. So I think in the relatively boutique space still, but I think making our way, and I think we've grown carefully, but always with sort of excitement about trying to push new boundaries. So when we first launched, we had 2 wines. We had a 750 ml bottle of stainless steel Chenin and a 750 ml bottle of a Rhone style red blend, which is what you have in front of you right now. And yeah, I think we feel really lucky. Both of those have made their way to Toronto and into the LCBO. And we've added wines from there. We started by taking both of those 2 wines, so that Chenin and that Rhone style red, and packing them in cans, which is something that I think was something we wanted to do from the very beginning. One, I think there's something meaningful about the portability of that, and what it means for sort of changing what wine can be in people's eyes. That it's not something that sort of has to be poured in a fancy glass at your table. It can be something that can be packed in a backpack and taken to the top of a mountain, and sort of shared with friends. So I think that was part of it, and I think we also really believe in the sustainability of it. The numbers don't lie. Aluminum is the most recycled material in the world, and they're much lighter to transport. So the sort of carbon footprint of packing it on a pallet and putting it in a truck, and sending it from one place to another is a lot lower.
I know this you may not believe me here, but in taking cans of wine to the top of a mountain and cracking them open, one would be committing a crime within Ontario doing that.
Okay.
One is not allowed to have open vessels anywhere outside of a licensed premises or a private home.
Well, then I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for that. Just cover my bases.
Okay, that's fine. Now, let's get back to the wine, because this one's just about to be released. And in normal times, you may have come into market to help promote this wine. So we're going to do it through the wonders of the internets and the wonders of Zoom. Tell us a little bit about this one here. You said this was one of your first wines. This vintage, we're looking at Shiraz, Cinsault, Mourvedre, and Grenache. Why did you choose to make a wine with this kind of cepage? And tell me how it tastes to you, because I know how it tastes to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, listen, I think what we wanted to do was sort of play to strength. So I think we've always sort of been in love with the Swartland, which is the sort of wide, expansive region that's sort of directly north of Cape Town up the western coast. So big fluctuations in day to night temperature, big fluctuations in elevation, and more sort of semi-arid in nature. So much drier. And I think some of the best Rhone varietals in the world, outside of Rhone itself, are really coming from this region. So
I agree.
working with Syrah, with Cinsault, with Grenache, with Mourvedre, I think both my co-founder and I have sort of always been really partial to the sort of Rhone style character, that sort of Southern French, and I feel like we thought that we could put together a really fantastic representation of how South Africa can sort of put their stamp on that style.
Yep.
So there's lots of Syrah grown in South Africa in general, and the blend on this changes vintage to vintage. We're mostly after this same profile. So vintages sort of after this have eschewed the Cinsault in favor of additional Syrah or additional Grenache. really after this profile, which is the sort of like brambly, almost spicy, sort of bright red fruits on the front of your palates, and sort of darker, more lush black fruits on the back of the palates, but balanced, right? Very clean, very balanced. I mean, those are the kind of wines we want to be making, you know, sort of minimal intervention, sort of let the terroir and the grapes do the talking. So yeah.
It's unmistakably South African for sure, but it's incredibly clean and very, very balanced on the palate. It's got really nice mid palate. There's a kind of, there's that nice Syrah stinkiness that I quite enjoy.
Absolutely.
But I do like that blend of red and black fruit. I think it has sufficient structure, but nothing that's going to frighten too many people away. I mean, it's a very easy to drink wine, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the focus. You know, we want it to be a wine that's affordable, and yeah, so a wine that can sort of that punches above its weight.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah.
And you have the Chenin over here as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's 100% stainless steel Chenin. It gets about 6 months of lees contact. So that's why I think, listen, I think Chenin is incredibly versatile, even from South Africa. It's amazingly versatile. But I think the style that we work with is the lees contact gives the wine a little bit of weight, so more medium bodied. But again, really bright, really fresh, really crisp. But I think that lees contact is what really gives it sort of a lot of its character.
Yeah, I'll have to search for some of that. But I'm mightily impressed with this. 1895 or thereabouts, I believe. Let me see. I had it
exactly.
just a few moments ago. Yes, 1895 in vintages. It's really good. Very good indeed. It would be remiss of me if I wasn't to ask you about how the pandemic has influenced your life. But I'm guessing that perhaps you've been unable to travel to South Africa, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I was in South Africa at the beginning of 2020,
Right.
and I sort of left amid the sort of the initial incoming and sort of raging of the pandemic.
Right.
And listen, again, you know, I said this to you previously, but I think that we feel incredibly grateful and lucky. I know I do personally, that everyone I know is safe and healthy, because as we know, there's a lot of people around the world for whom that is not the case. And I think, you know, from our perspective, our business really sort of thrived and grew in 2020. And again, I have some guilt about that, because again, I know that was not the case for everyone, but we feel really lucky. I think we found new ways to push ourselves, to connect with people. And I think that's been really valuable. I cannot lie to you, as you mentioned, I would have been to Toronto or all around Ontario a number of times in 2020 and into 2021, and I have not been able to do that, and I miss that. I love people, and the sort of the distance that's been created between us, I think has been really challenging and sad. And I'm hoping that we sort of, when we do come back together, we come back together with sort of real new appreciation for our relationships and the sort of the way that we're connected with one another.
One would hope so. Is that your notifications going off over there?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's my Slack. That's someone calling.
That's okay. That's all right. I recognize the ringtone. Well, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. Very nice to meet you, and hopefully we're going to see you in Toronto at some point, in Ontario at some point in the future. But in the meanwhile, I'll make sure that we're all enjoying your wine. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. It was wonderful chatting with you, and I look forward to meeting you in Toronto in person sometime soon.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.